go straight and start to give the floor to Mr. Akabueze to start. All other issues we'll address later because we have to respect the time. Mr. Akabueze, we welcome you once again, sir, for joining us this morning. And we welcome you. I think we should just take the floor as part of the presentation. You're welcome, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Shola. It's my pleasure to be with you this morning. And so I also extend my regards and esteem to all the participants at this webinar. I'd like to share my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Your screen is about to come up, sir.
Let me know when you see it.
Definitely, sir.
Hello?
Hello, sir.
Yes.
We have not seen it on the share screen.
Okay, let me.
On the share screen.
It's not coming up.
Okay, let me find out what's going on. All right. Can you see it now?
Yes, yes.
Fantastic, sir.
Okay.
Sir.
Yeah.
Okay, you can proceed. Please proceed.
You can see it now, right?
Yes.
Okay. How much time do I have again? I know it was on the screen earlier, but I didn't make a mental note. How much time do I have so I can pace myself?
30 minutes.
All right, okay.
30 minutes, yes.
All right, great. So this is an outline of what we would be, looking at. Let me get on with the introduction. Essentially, I've been asked to speak to us on the key objectives of the federal government of Nigeria's 2021 budget and expected impact on development. It's important to state here that this is the federal government's budget. It's not the national budget, it's not Nigeria's budget, because given our constitutional arrangement, all three tiers of government are required to produce annual budget. So this is the federal government's budget. All 36 states of the federation are required to prepare and pass their own budgets. All the 774 local government areas are likewise required to prepare annual budgets. It's the aggregation of all of that that will constitute Nigeria's national budget. So by way of introduction, I say here that a public budget is critical to ensure a well-functioning society and a competitive economy. The budget is basically that instrument through which the government, gives effect to its responsibilities to provide public goods and services, as well as create an environment that is conducive for business to thrive. Everything ultimately devolves to money, spending money, and without that, these objectives of government will not be achieved, and the budget is that instrument that enables government to spend money. Government policies and programs are implemented through the budget, and therefore a timely approval of the budget is critical, not just for government's own delivery of the public goods and services, but also because the FGN's budget in particular has strong signaling effect for the rest of the economy. The private sector takes a cue from its policy direction and the policy direction that undergirds the budget, and that is why it is critical for us to sustain the return to a predictable January to December fiscal year. And I say here also that the government's budget is a moral document. It's not just a technical document, not just a set of numbers, but it's a moral document because you can tell who and what a country values by examining its budget. So always keep this at the back of your mind. For 2021, the key considerations the federal government's budget in preparing this budget, with the global, domestic socioeconomic context, government's own development priorities, as contained in the, for this particular case, the economic sustainability plan, which itself is a transition document between the economic recovery and growth plan, which lapsed at the end of 2020, and the medium-term national development plan 2021 to 2025, which is still in the works. Also, the macroeconomic framework assumptions and parameters, fiscal projections for revenues, both oil and non-oil, because we are running a deficit budget. The sustainability of the deficit and overall debt levels is a key consideration also. And then, of course, the overall impact on the economy, on the people and businesses of the budget. The budget is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. And therefore, its impact, has to be kept in focus. And so in this presentation, I'll be seeking to deepen participants' understanding of the FGN's 2021 budget. And because this is the audience today is principally drawn from the business community, also trying to draw attention to the opportunities for business in the 2021 budget, and finally to highlight the critical roles of the business community in achieving the objectives of this budget. Okay, so let me then move on to looking at the context of this budget, the economic environment, as well as the objectives. First, the global context. COVID-19 dominated, the year 2020, and so against the background of that 2021 budget was prepared. Of course, the shadow of COVID-19 still looms large over 2021. And this, at a point in 2020, the entire global economy was in recession. Coming into 2021, there are projections for recovery as the world gets a grip around COVID-19, whether it's through vaccinations or therapeutic remedies. But for Nigeria, the IMF is forecasting, for the globe, the IMF is forecasting a 5.5% global growth for 2021 after a 3.5% decline. And so that's effectively a 9% lift coming from negative 3.5 to positive 5.5. Okay. For Nigeria, we weren't spared the deleterious effects of COVID-19 in 2020 and coming into 2021. Crude oil prices are our principal source of foreign exchange earnings. Saw the price drop from a peak of over $72 per barrel at the beginning of 2020 to at some point below $20, and closing the year with an average price of just over $40. And on top of that, we had to take a significant output cut. COVID-19 also disrupted global trade and logistics, and this impacted some of our other revenue streams like custom duty and VAT. And of course, all of this pushed the economy into recession by the end of Q3 2020. Thankfully, we have, as of the end of Q4, emerged from the recession with just a positive growth of 0.11%. For 2021, IMF is projecting a 1.5% growth for Nigeria, but the Nigerian National Bureau of Statistics is projecting a 3% growth, and that is the basis for the 2021 budget. We, over the last 2 years, the NBS has got it right much more than the IMF in terms of projecting growth levels in the economy, and so we're sticking with them. Over the medium term, however, we must strive for significantly higher growth than 3%, because if our population is growing at 2.6%, at 3%, the generality of the people will not feel the growth, and so it will still look like there is no growth. National Bureau of Statistics reported an increase in unemployment between Q3 2018 and Q2 2020, which is the latest unemployment data that's available. And correlated to, sorry, that word is true, the high unemployment rate, poverty rate is also high. The latest estimate from NBS is also of a 40.1% poverty prevalence rate, which means approximately 83 million Nigerians are classified as poor. So in the 2021 budget seeks to address these challenges, and so it provides for an expanded social investment program, as well as several youth empowerment schemes, because the unemployment challenge is bigger among the youth. Okay, without a doubt, COVID-19 has worsened Nigeria's poverty and unemployment situation, but this is to be expected. Pandemics, as a general rule, worsen the problems of inequality. Inflation is also another key issue of concern. It rose from 12.13% in January 2020 to 16.747% in January 2021. And a key driver of this is food inflation. And of course, this food inflation itself is propelled by factors like, there's structural issues that, make it difficult for produce to get from the farms to the, market shelves. But this is also compounded by insecurity, and of course the border closure also had an impact on food prices, because of the still significant amount of food import that occurs across the borders. So as of January, when the overall CPI stood at 16.47%, food inflation exceeded 20%. The 2021 budget of economic recovery and resilience encapsulates government's plan to accelerate our economic recovery process, to promote social inclusion, as well as strengthen the resilience of the economy. So this is why also an early commencement of implementation is very helpful. This 2021 budget has the following core objectives. 1, to strengthen the macroeconomic environment. 2, to accelerate the economic recovery process. 3, to invest in critical infrastructure, human capital development, and to enable institutions, especially in key job-creating sectors. To incentivize the private sector to make the necessary investment to complement public investment, and also to enhance the social investment program and thereby deepen their impact on the most vulnerable segments of the population. I'll proceed now to share the highlights of the 2021 federal government budget. First, the underlying assumptions, parameters, and targets, which continue to be critically dependent on oil. And so these the assumptions around oil price and oil production continue to be important considerations. So for 2021, the oil price benchmark is $40 and production is 1.86 million barrels per day. Let me say upfront that this includes condensates. Currently, our OPEC quota is about 1.5 million barrels per day, and we have capacity to produce 300,000 to 400,000 barrels of equivalent of condensate daily, and condensates are not counted in OPEC quotas. And we're also hopeful of an upward revision in the OPEC quota, especially as Nigeria's compliance record in the last 1 year has been, very commendable. Exchange rate, the budget is based on the 379 naira to the dollar exchange. The rate in the I&E window, which is about 390. But then, as I often say, this is not of a major concern for me from the standpoint of the budget, because what this says is that the dollar revenues are monetized at a lower exchange rate, which makes our projection more conservative. But when it comes to expenditures, essentially the bulk of the expenditures are based on market price, and market prices are determined by whatever is the prevailing exchange rate in the market. Inflation, we're projecting to see inflation drop to about 12% from over 16% currently. And while this looks like a stretch, I always like to remind us that during the 2016-2017 recession, by the beginning of 2017, inflation rate had risen above 18%, and it came all the way down to 11% before it started creeping up again. The GDP growth, we already spoke to that. Okay. These are just some justification for why we think that $40 per barrel of oil price projection is realistic. Okay, I've spoken to the inflation, our expectation that it will come down again. Generally, we consider the key assumptions and parameters underlying the 2021 budget as realistic, but then that's our view, and something that we're happy to discuss if anyone feels otherwise. So an overview of the revenue and expenditure and the deficit, the numbers. Aggregate revenue projected approximately 8 trillion naira. This is substantially higher than the 2020 budget, but then still remains really considerably low. And that's why our overall budget size is also constrained. An aggregate budget of 13.6 trillion naira, while in nominal terms is our highest, is still way below the size of budget that we ought to be operating given the scale of the responsibilities and the challenges that we face. But the budget size is constrained by our relatively low revenues. The 2021 budget has the budgets of 60 government-owned enterprises integrated into it. And this is part of our goal of promoting fiscal transparency, accountability, and comprehensiveness in our budgeting process. For 2021, the split between oil and non-oil revenues is approximately 30 and 70%. Oftentimes people report this in reverse, but this is actually how it works out. Okay, foreign exchange earnings, yes, oil continues to be over 90%, but in terms of revenues, the contribution has, declined. Revenues, as I highlighted earlier, remain a key challenge and a key constraining, the most important constraint for in our budget process. And so we are driving what we call the strategic revenue growth initiatives, and these are some of the measures that have been taken. Government-owned enterprises represent significant upside for growing our revenues, and so an enhanced performance management framework is being put in place for these GOEs, which includes, of course, targeting, basically, and monitoring those, measuring those targets, and putting in place a regime of reward and sanction for non-compliance with targets, but also cost control. And the Finance Act 2020 actually, sets a 50% cost to revenue ratio for the GOEs. Okay. Okay. Other measures include trying to get to rein in what we call tax expenditures. All of the waivers, concessions, and incentives that are granted, because these are, coming to be quite significant. For 2019, for instance, these were estimated to be about 4.7 trillion naira, which essentially, turns out to be equal the total revenues actually, generated by the federal government in 2019. So we need to rein these in and basically make sure that they're justifiable. Improving tax administration, work to optimize government revenue is also a key initiative that we're driving. This is a schematic that just shows, okay, the key anchors of our strategic revenue growth initiative, which is driving independent revenues, monitoring them better, plugging any fiscal drainers, the annual finance acts, which we have returned to. It's a disciplined process to facilitate the implementation of the annual budgets. And then, of course, leveraging technology and automation. So in terms of expenditure, where the money is going, okay, I spoke to the aggregate spending limit already, but the non-debt recurring expenditure is 44.1% of the total, approximately 6 trillion. This is largely salaries, and capital expenditure is also significantly higher. In nominal terms, this is our highest capital expenditure budget. Okay, debt service has continued to grow as the debt portfolio has grown also. Debt service is 2021, it's 24.5% of the total expenditure and is 40% of projected revenues. Of course, if we fail to meet the projected revenues, this debt service, will then end up higher than this as a percentage. But even at the level projected of 40%, this is already above our, policy, whatever guidance threshold of about 30%. So this is a matter of concern that, debt service. But you see, oftentimes this concern is framed as a debt issue, but we like to see it as a revenue issue. The reason our debt service to revenue ratio is, at an uncomfortable level is not because our debts are too high, but because our revenues are too low. So we have a revenue challenge, which we must, seek to address. The aggregate budget deficit is 5.6 trillion, which is 3.93% of the GDP. The Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007 sets a 3% threshold for annual deficit to GDP, but then the same act makes an exception. It says when, in the opinion of the president, the country faces existential risks, that the 3% threshold can be exceeded. And it's currently the opinion of Mr. President, and that opinion, that the nation faces existential risks. I mean, we have technically at war. And so when you look at this 13.6 trillion naira of expenditure, over 2 trillion naira of that is for security and defense. If we didn't have the current security challenges, some of which threaten the very existence of the nation, we will not need to budget that much for security and defense. And so, and that means the deficit will be lower. So, but the deficit is to be financed mainly by borrowings, 4.6 trillion naira of new borrowings, 710 billion naira of drawdown on existing multilateral, bilateral loan agreements, and then projected privatization proceeds of about 205 billion naira, mainly coming from sale of some power assets. Okay, the role of the private sector in achieving these budget objectives. Okay, we think that of concern to the private sector should be matters like our government's choice, the approach to fund its expenditures affects the private sector. We're trying very carefully for government not to crowd out the private sector from the capital and the financial markets, and that's why, as a deliberate strategy, 50% of the projected new borrowings are being structured as foreign borrowings, so that the domestic financial markets are not crowded. The private sector is not crowded out by government. How government spending decisions and priorities stimulate private sector participation will be also of concern. And then, of course, how the private sector can participate in and hold the government accountable in the management of public resources. All right. So both the public sector and the private sector must work, hand in hand, if we are going to basically, speed up the rate of economic, recovery. There's some specific things that we think the private sector needs to consider. One is to support government's reform agenda. Some of the key reform measures on the fiscal side that have taken recently include the Open Treasury Portal, which puts details of all payments 5 million naira and above by the federal government in the public domain. The portal is there, accessible to the public to check what these payments are for. Mandatory implementation of a biometric payroll system across the federal civil service, the IPPIS, that has become very topical, especially with the resistance of people like the university lecturers as to, to join this. Publication of backlog of audited accounts of NNPC and its subsidiaries, the gradual elimination of regressive subsidies on petrol and electricity, which are expected to free up, trillions of naira over the medium term. Determined push to establish a unique national identification system for all Nigerian citizens and residents. This is important, and I'm sure we know why. A commitment to global open government partnership principles. The president signed Nigeria onto this in 2016, and this is designed to deliver more transparent, accountable, and fiscally responsible governance. The private sector should therefore get more actively involved in policy advocacy. I think that private sector is too reticent when it comes to this, and so usually it degenerates into a ding-dong between government and labor. And the private sector that stands to benefit immensely from this policy, these reforms, usually stands aloof. The second area is resource mobilization. The private sector has a role to play in this case, and principally through paying appropriate taxes as and when due. We have one of the lowest, indeed on the continent of Africa, probably the lowest tax to GDP ratio. and even the public revenue to GDP ratio. These ratios, these ratios are about 50% of the African average. Okay, and clearly, without a doubt, there's massive tax evasion and poor accountability, which highly account for for this. And we also have schemes like the Roads Trust Fund scheme that we think that the private sector should be more involved with. Again, project and program monitoring. It's not possible for the 2021 budget includes over 20,000 projects scattered all around the country. Not even just in state, but local governments all across this country. It's not possible for us from the budget office to monitor, these, projects by ourselves. And so we think that the sector should take a greater interest and ownership regarding public projects and programs, and basically be part of that thing. We have set up even, platforms to, support this, but they're not made use of, like the Citizens Budget Portal on the Budget Office website. Okay, another key role is private capital. Okay, clearly this economy needs significantly larger investments, and this can only come from the private sector, and the investments are needed in practically every area. Okay, this just shows on a comparative basis private infrastructure financing in Nigeria and some other comparator countries, and it shows there clearly that we are, still way, we were at the bottom of the pack. PPPs represent a key avenue for the private sector to get involved in, especially delivering public infrastructure projects. And overall, the Nigerian PPP experience is limited with varying degrees of success. And for a number of reasons which I have discussed here, absence of clear legal framework, lack of expertise, non-availability of long-term financing, or public sector contract management, an unresolved conundrum as to whether infrastructure is a public good or an economic good. And so you see CSOs and labor and other, stakeholder groups, opposing these PPPs. Okay, we have the 2021 budget contains many provisions and opportunities for business, with emphasis on leveraging private capital for development. So I believe that these slides will be available to participants, so you can look these up yourselves and see, depending on your particular area of business, what might be of, specific interest to you. As I conclude, let me say that the FGN 2021 budget and the accompanying Finance Act 2020 are expected to contribute significantly to reposition the Nigerian economy on the path of recovery, growth, and resilience. New job opportunities are expected to be created to reduce unemployment, lift more of our citizens out of poverty, and enhance consumer purchasing power. I outlined earlier on the key initiatives and projects in the 2021 budget. These are all designed to support, business activities and ensure business survival, which should then give the private sector that capacity to create jobs. It's the private sector that creates jobs, it's not the public sector. There are only so many jobs that can be added in the public sector. The private sector is encouraged to take advantage of business opportunities, investment incentives in the different sectors. Government on its part is committed to sustain the early passage of annual budgets, as well as the effective implementation of this 2021 and subsequent budgets. Government is also committed to enhance partnership with the private sector. And I close by saying, and underscoring this point, that the private sector's support is critical to achieving the 2021 budget objectives. Thank you for your kind attention.
Okay, thank you very much, sir, Mr. Kabeze, for the detailed presentation, and thank you for the offer to share the presentation. We look forward to receiving the presentation so that we can forward it to the participants. While you are still there, the president, unfortunately, of the chamber is in London. He's unable to make contact on this forum. The deputy president is on, Alhaji Sharif Balogun. And we'll just say a few words right now. Deputy President, are you on, sir? Hello? Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Yes, you have the floor, sir.
Hello?
Go on, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you very much. Good morning, our distinguished guest speaker, Mr. Ben, whom I would like to address as Professor Ben Akabuzi. After that simplistic delivery, I will say, because I used to find budgets so difficult and boring and all sort of grammars and figures. But after listening to this presentation, it made it seem as if I was in kindergarten school, you know. Thank you very much. You really made this budget understandable in the way businessmen can understand it and make use of it to be able to plan, make projections, look at which direction the country is going, what the government is trying to do, and then enable us also to take crucial decisions that will affect our businesses. Thank you very much. And on behalf of the President, Otumba Akomolafe, I would like to welcome all members to this very important webinar that has just is taking place. I'm sorry I came in a bit late, but it was because of the importance of the topic and also the speaker that I joined in. As you all know, I am bereaved, and I'm just going into prayers now for my late dad. But I thought I would just hang on a few minutes to be able to say a few words and thank our guest speaker on behalf of the President. We are all aware of the various issues grappling Nigeria concerning our yearly budgets and its implementation. Over time, there had been concerns about capital expenditures, ratio, and funds inadequacy available to pursue the various infrastructural needs of our country. But like we know, it's clearly from what we have seen of the projections of our revenue, we need to show some understanding with government, because you can actually go beyond what your capacity is at any given time. But of course, we have to strive also to find alternate ways of raising our revenue profile. Once we're able to get more revenue, then we'll be able to spend more or allocate more to the critical areas that will boost our economy, mainly which has to do with our infrastructure, power, roads, railway, as the case may be. If we're able to do this, then I think it will have a resultant effect on our overall economy. Some of the things that really caught my attention from the presentations are areas of debt repayment. Like the Prof said, you can see it's a large percentage of our revenue, debt to revenue. And what happens if we are not able to realize this revenue? Then there are issues to be looked at from that. But personally, also, I think the export presents, especially on agriculture, which I know government is doing a lot, and but more can still be done. And I think that's one area where our revenue profile can really increase. And being someone who is part of the government, I don't know if there are specifics as to what government will do or intends to do to stimulate exports to ensure that more revenues can be achieved from this. I mean, because if businesses thrive, of course, the resultant tax that they will pay also will increase. So, but we will need to see what government is going to do or will do or can do to in terms of export, especially of agricultural product. Because if countries like Netherlands can be exporting agri products and earning several billions, if I'm not mistaken, over $500 billion worth of agro product. And Nigeria is several times larger than Netherlands. We have more friendly climates. We have the land. So I think we need to look at areas like agriculture to see how we can maximize to be able to raise our revenue profile. These were just some of my thoughts and some of the snippets I gathered from the presentation. But we really thank you, Professor Ben Akabuzi, someone who has always been associated with economics, with the budget. There's no way budget is going to be mentioned in this country. Your name must feature prominently. So we're honored that you accepted our invitation, and we thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Please accept my sincere condolences on the loss of your dear father.
Sir, do you want to address that?
Thank you so
or
much.
do you want us
Yes, let me address his issue, especially as we may have to also, excuse me. I mean, thank you for those very succinct comments on the budget. You've also rightly underscored the revenue challenge and the implications, especially pertaining to the debt service. And then your suggestion regarding exports, focus on exports. That's also spot on. The reality, however, is that part of the challenge when it comes to exports is that Nigeria's non-oil export is grossly underreported. There's a lot of export that happens, and that's why, for instance, lately you see central bank is on a war path with exporters to get them to repatriate proceeds. But when you look at comparative trade data from some countries, I wouldn't like to name them, but there's a country, for instance, where in their trade data, they report that about 30% of the, and this is a country that is big on gemstones, about 30% of the gemstones come from Nigeria. That's what their own trade data will show. When you look at Nigeria's trade data, it shows zero exports to the same country. And all of this is private sector folks that are, basically in this, there's a lot of informality, which basically we have, again, because of the reputational issue that we suffer on account of some unscrupulous players who export things without, you now find that especially with agricultural exports. Some Nigerians, a lot of Nigeria's yams, for instance, are exported through other West African countries and packaged as exports of those countries because of the way we've sold ourselves short in terms of the perception of the quality of these things coming from us. So this is an area that the chamber and other organizations in the organized private sector need to create some kind of framework for better self-regulation, and so we can better drive exports. We see, if you go around the agri belt, you see a significant presence of even foreign players in the export of non-oil products, and a lot of these are underreported. Even things like gold, significant exports of gold, they don't show up in our trade data. There's a lot of illegal mining activities going on. So we will continue to seek to have this, but at a time when you're chasing down terrorists, chasing down kidnappers and bandits and whatever, suddenly chasing illegal miners it becomes falls lower in the pecking order of
very true, very true.
the security agencies.
All right.
Question.
Are you done with that, sir?
Yes.
Hello?
Okay.
So we now want to open up and allow participants to say anything they want, and then we'll now round up with a vote of thanks by Ambassador Bayoido. But before I do that, let me just quickly recognize other board members that are here. We have Chief Thomas Oshobu, Chairman of our membership committee. We have Mr. Ibukwe Futayo. We have Mrs. Violet Abukadri, Chairman of our Trade Mission Committee. Recognize Chief Fola Oshibo is there with us. Mrs. Oyewale Makele is there with us. Now, on the comments that we have seen, there is somebody that mentioned the issue of the ports.
Yeah, I can read them. If you want, I can just, I've opened the Q&A box, so I can just quickly address those. It's about the government really doing to the extreme terrible service delivery at the ports. I mean, without a doubt, that's a matter of concern. And I think you've seen government over the last 3 years try different things, all kinds of panels, some of which eventually get disbanded. Finally, I mean, let's face it, that the way I see it, there are 3 key solutions to this. Okay. Number 1 is it is no longer sustainable given the location of the current ports in Lagos. There are Apapa and Tinkan Island ports that are pretty much, to get them, you have to go through the heart of the city, cut through the city. In terms of locations, those are no longer, something needs to happen. And thankfully, we have the deep sea port developments, happening in Lekki, Badagry, all that. So it's not sustainable for, those ports to continue to be the principal. So in addition to the the new port development activities, we must also get, operationalize the, other ports, especially those in the eastern parts of the country. And so there's a lot of, focus on trying to, get that, to happen. But then with the ports in Pantinkan, specifically, the challenges include the road, the access road. You can see a lot of progress is being made on that road. When that road is completed, especially the Oronshoki-Apapa Expressway, it should provide relief. And then there is the management, the process management of trucks, entering and exiting the ports. I think February 27th, 2 days' time, is the effective date for the NPA's new e-call-up system. The technology solution to try to manage this process. And then we've got to understand also that getting refineries, building new refineries or getting our refineries to work, and thankfully, one of the major new refineries, the Dangote refinery, is nearing completion, will provide relief, because what you find is that most of the petroleum products consumed in the country is imported through those same ports, with all those tank farms lined up there. So when you have about 5,000 trucks needing to approach Apapa and Tinkan axis daily, both to evacuate petroleum products and the normal freight into the ports, it's a nightmare. So if we have refineries working, the pipeline, the product pipeline network and depots across the country reactivated, we would take away the pressure of trucks going into to get petroleum products from there. And these are the things that need to happen and are happening. Without a doubt, it's significant cost to this economy. Where when it begins to cost, almost as much, or if to cost more to get a container from the port to Ikeja than it costs to get the container from China to the Nigerian port, then we have a crisis on our hands. Some of the underlying assumptions and parameters had changed. Can the budget 2021 still be realistic? I don't know which specific one has changed in a manner that makes the budget unrealistic. The one that has moved the most is probably oil prices, which we have $40 per barrel, and oil is currently trading at over $60. I don't see how that makes the budget unrealistic. Indeed, we deliberately take a conservative approach to projecting oil prices because it's totally out of our control. But if the actual prices are better than projected, it's an upside for the budget. All it means is if our revenues are higher, we will reduce the amount that we need to borrow. This doesn't make the budget unrealistic. Does the budget make any provision for the acquisition of vaccine for all and sundry? The budget as currently, I presume you are referring to COVID-19 vaccines. The budget as currently has aggregate provisions that can be deployed for vaccine procurement of just under 70 billion naira, but that's for our routine immunization programs, not for COVID-19 vaccines, specifically. So that covers vaccines for polio and, all of these other immunizable, diseases. So for COVID-19 we are currently reviewing it. But let me say here that Nigeria already has a commitment to receive about 57 million naira, so 57 million units of the vaccine free of charge. And so it's even debatable whether we need to buy more. But of course, we need to provide for the operational cost of delivering these vaccines. And so for 2021, we are currently engaged with the Ministry of Health on the necessity of a supplementary budget or an alternative solution to addressing this.
Okay, I think
I see some people are also posting their questions in the chat box rather than the Q&A.
Someone's speaking about the Niger Delta situation. Then another on SS crude account.
Question on the oil benchmark of $40 in the budget. Is there any plan to save part of the proceeds in the excess crude account, considering that, well, essentially the way the excess crude account works is, as you know, revenue is price times volume. So while we are currently running over price projection, okay, production volume is not currently, necessarily averaging the level projected, and it's only when the aggregate revenue based on your price and volume exceed the projection that the excess goes into the excess crude account. So it's not just the price point that determines that. But if things remain the way they are, then yes, we should see some accretion to the excess crude account this year, especially as that account is grossly depleted and needs replenishment. Has government treating or going to treat the volume of frauds we read about? But I'm sure the anti-corruption agencies are, quite busy, dealing with that. How is the government treating? Okay, that's what is the federal government's implementation target for the 2021 budget? Our implementation target for the budget is always 100%. And that's really what budgets be. It's not, we don't start out planning to perform less than 100. And by the way, the 2020 budget performed 100%. Okay. Oftentimes people confuse the level of implementation of the capital budget with the overall level of implementation of the budget. The budget for 2020, for instance, capital expenditure was only 26% of aggregate revenues. In 2021 is 32%. But so capital expenditure was only 26%. So you have 74% that was between recurrent and debt service. And these ones performed 100%. These ones, and they usually do. So the notion when you read people saying, oh, the budget performed less than 50% or whatever, it's not true. It's because they're speaking to only the capital budget. But in 2020, even the capital budget performed 89%. And the reason we were at 100% of the aggregate expenditure was on the debt service side. We ended up, spending more because some of the cheaper debt that we projected to get didn't materialize, and we had to resort to more expensive domestic borrowing. And so it's important to understand that the children target, the simple answer is 100%. How is the government treating or going to treat Okay, I think I've addressed that. Yes, so shall I turn it back to you?
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you very much once again. Is there any other verbal contribution from anyone before we close up? In case there is none, may I call on Ambassador Bayo Idowu to give the vote of thanks on behalf of the chamber to Mr. Bernard Kabwezi. Ambassador, please.
Thank you very much, DG. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Perfectly.
Okay. On behalf of the president and the board of the Nigerian-American Chamber of Commerce, and indeed, on behalf of the generality of thousands of our members who are operating in the private sector, we'd like to thank Mr. Kabwezi for sparing his time, his expertise, and his deep knowledge of issues, bringing it to bear on this presentation. I follow the Deputy President in observing that really complex things were made to be quite simple in this presentation, and we thank you very much. On the part of the Chamber, we are in advocacy and networking to see that these policies of government are brought to fulfillment. There's a part for the private sector and there's a part for the government. We urge Mr. Kabwezi to also help us in the budget monitoring to see that all these beautiful schemes that we have on paper are delivered in the public and private sectors. Once again, I would like to thank all participants, including non-members of the chamber, for taking time to participate in this presentation, and which you will agree with me that we are all the better for it. Thank you, Mr. Kabwezi, and thank you all for sparing your time.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ambassador Idowu. We also have to let everyone know that this session was streamlined on YouTube also. Some people were able to access it through that. So that is all for today. Our next edition will be March 25th, I think. We'll inform members accordingly. Thank you all for coming. Thank you very much, Mr. Kabwezi.
DG?
And your team members also.
DG?
Sir, somebody?
Just a moment.
Yes,
I would like to inform the guest speaker that by virtue of my experience and knowledge having in Washington, I have some ideas which I will present. I will visit his office when it is opportune to give him some, especially on private capital.
Mm.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, sir. That's much appreciated.
Okay.
Anytime.
So, till next month, we thank everybody. And we also say thank you to your team, sir. Dr. Meka and Andy and the secretary. They were very cooperative in trying to make this happen. We thank them all. Thank you very much. And regards to your family. Thank you all to all participants, and bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I'll email the presentation to you right away.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well done.
Okay.
Well
Thank
done.
you, sir.
Congratulations.
Thank you, DG. Well done.
Thank you very much, sir.
Ambassador, good afternoon, sir.
Sir, I bow. Thank you, sir. Afternoon, sir.